Hi friends, welcome. Today we've got a very interesting decision by AAR on what is parota and how different is it from what they call as roti, and does it are both these one and the same? I think that's something for uh, left for the courts to decide, and it's so unfortunate that it had to go to this extent to for the judiciary to get involved and come with a conclusion. So coming back, friends, yes, this is the case of ID Fresh Foods on whether parota could be classified as roti for the sake of GST. I would thank Vigneshwar and Jugal for their efforts to get the presentation for us. So these are some of the terms, more or less straightforward terms we have used in the presentation. This is the agenda. We go into the facts, the contention, the products covered under Chapter 1905, scope of residual entry, findings of the authority, what are the benefits of entry under 99A, and the ruling, and where we are now. To start off with, let's get into the facts of the case. So, applicant is a food products company who is involved in the preparation of a wide range of ready to cook fresh foods, including idli and dosa batter, parotas, chapati, curd, paneer, whole wheat parota, and Malabar parota. So these are they are into the they're not in the fast food business, but they are into the business of producing ready to eat food. And the application to the AR pertains to classification of whole wheat paratha and Malabar paratha. And the question raised by the applicant is whether the preparation of whole wheat paratha and Malabar paratha can be classified under 1905, which is for rotis and kakras, where the GST rate is 5%. And that paid the AAR application fee of 10,000 for this purpose. The SSE's contention was the applicant states that the product whole wheat paratha and Malabar paratha is available with a shelf life of 3 to 7 days. It consists of ingredients like wheat flour, water, purified water, edible vegetable oil, fat, and salt. And after making all the ingredients, the product will be subject to heat treatment on a pan or a tawa for making it available for consumption. Now, if you look at there's a new entry number 99A uh, with the description kakra, plain chapati, or roti without defining the description, which was inserted via the notification 1 by 2007. And the applicant stated that the product whole wheat paratha and Malabar paratha should come within the ambit of kakra, plain chapati, or roti. The SSC's contention here was classification of a product can be analyzed on the basis of three parameters: reference to general rules of interpretation in Customs Tariff Act, judicial precedents, and reference to explanatory notes issued by World Customs Organization. See, the explanatory note on Chapter 19 stipulates that the products covered hereunder are uh, made up of products from Chapter 11, and the applicant contends that whole wheat paratha is also covered as made up of wheat, which is covered under Chapter 11. So this is the background. And considering the above, the SSC states that 1905 would be the ideal classification, and 1905 talks about breads, pastries, biscuits, and other bakers' wares, whether or not containing cocoa and weak acids of a kind suitable for pharma use. And the last level of classification would be 1905, 1990, others. So this is where the revenue, since the since subject products are not covered explicitly under chapter heading 1905, then it could come under the ambit of uh, others. And the applicant intends to place reliance on the ruling passed by AR in the case of Signature International Food, where it was held that paratha and wraps are covered by the scope of entry of 99A. So, friends, just give me a moment. There is some connectivity issue. back, friends. Also. There was some internet connectivity issues. We're back. So the SSC contended that going by the AAR verdict in Signature International Foods India, it was held that paratha and paratha wraps are covered by the scope of entry under 99A. So this was the decision. This was the contention of the SSC. And to give you a perspective, Chapter 1905, these are the products which are covered here. So you would see that there is breads of various varieties, rusks, pastries, cakes, extruded or expander or papad and others. And the applicant contends that without prejudice, the product should not be classified under the residuary entry space. And application, because on the following grounds, the application of residual entry to an item can be resorted only when there is no other item under which this can be brought in. And there are quite a good number of decisions which have got a got similar outcomes favorably for the SSC. So then what happened? The authority, the AAR, goes on to say, heading 1905 covers bread, pastry, biscuits, which are completely cooked food, which are ready for consumption and which requires no further processing. Although Chapter 19 covers preparations of flour, including wheat flour, and even the impugned products are made up of wheat flour, they are not readily consumable. Thus, the impugned products do not merit classification under 1905. Again, as the applicant contends that the product should not be classified under the residual entry, the AAR further proceeded to examine the right classification of the impugned products. And here, they moved on to Chapter 21, which deals with miscellaneous edible preparations, and heading 2106, which covers food preparations not elsewhere specified or included. So let's look at if you look at 2106, it covers preparations for use directly or after processing for human consumption. And further, it's clear that it is evident that the impugned products could be classified under 2016 to 210690. And the AAR said to conclude the classification, the AAR analyzed the general rules of interpretation, and Rule 1 and 2 are not applicable as there is no specific mention of parota. So, whereby states that Rule 3A states that special entry shall prevail, general entry for classification. And here we don't have parota doesn't have any specific entry. Further, 3B talks about composite goods consisting of different materials, whereby such materials provide special character which is not applicable in the given case. And 3C provides that where a good cannot be classified under the above rules, you go to the last in the numerical order. And therefore, going by the above rationale, the judiciary confirmed, the authority confirmed that 2106 should be the item as it comes within the last in the order. Now, what is the benefit if something comes under 99A? See, but 99A was inserted through 34/2017, where the GST rate of 5% was applicable on fulfillment of the following two conditions. They should come under the ambit of 1905 or 2106, and they must be either kakra, plain chapati, or roti. So, the issue was with classification. Where will it come? 1905 or 2106? Then the authority said it should come under 2106. That's fine. But if someone were to take the benefit of the circular under 34/2017, the circular said that it must either be kakra, plain chapati, or roti. So, though the first condition is satisfied, in this case it comes under 2106, that's the AAR themselves are accepting to this. The impugned products do not satisfy the second condition because, in their concern, kakra, plain chapati, or roti are completely cooked and ready to eat food preparation, whereas whole wheat paratha or Malabar paratha needs to be heated before consumption. Since they are different, 99A shall not be applicable to them. So, this is where the contention lies. Whether kakra, plain chapati, or roti could be treated with treated at par with whole wheat paratha or Malabar paratha, which requires heating prior to consumption. And if you look at this verdict, I mean, the notification, friends, and the reason why uh, the SSE was keen on getting within this ambit was if it's kakra, roti, or plain chapati, the rate for taxation will be 5% and not 18%. So, which is why the final ruling, the product parota is classified under 2106. It is covered under the entry 99A of Schedule 1, dated 28/6, as amended by again the similar notification dated 13/10. But it shall not fall within the ambit of kakra, plain chapati, or roti. As one, it requires heating, and second, these are not like products in common parlance, as well as in respect of essential nature. So therefore, this would get taxed as food preparations not specifically included elsewhere. So under this ambit, under this, by virtue of this interpretation, your paratha is not kakra or roti, and it's any other preparation, food preparation, and would fall with and would attract a GST rate of 18%. So I think this was the moot point, which I think many of them felt was worth. At least it became a newsworthy item where they said paratha is not roti. So when you look at the concerns here, the first was should paratha be treated as roti for interpretation? Second, if frozen roti, which is not ready to eat, would that be within the ambit of 99A? Because if frozen roti is going by the AR's argument, since it is not readily consumable, it would not fall within the ambit of 99A. It is different from plain roti. If frozen roti is put in, would that come? Yes, that's again another question. So, what would now happen is people who are selling frozen rotis possibly could get taxed at a higher rate on GST. And the larger question here is, shouldn't the government focus on simplifying the regulation rather than making it so ambiguous where for even such small issues you need to go and consume the AAR's time? That's a question for the regulators to understand and answer, because we are not helping the cause of doing business in India if these courts have to go and take decision on these. So these were some of our thoughts on this first decision, what we are looking at. What we also intend to do is look at another case which came up this week, Sterlite Technologies, at least which in our opinion is nothing but outrageous in terms of interpretation. Of course, people are entitled to their views. But if goods are purchased and sold outside India, GST would apply because they don't fall within the ambit of export. I mean, that's something which we feel yes, you've gone exactly by the letter of the law. Whether it fulfills the spirit, yes, let's go through the decision and then let's try and understand where it actually hits. So Vigneshwar and Jugal have helped us get this. That are great. We're grateful to them for helping us with the presentation. So these are some of the terms which we have used, straightforward abbreviations. So let's look at it. We've got taxability of imports under GST, GST on outward supply from place of vendor to customer. Facts of the case, let's try and understand. So first we'll have a brief regulatory background and we look at the facts of the case. What are the issues raised by the applicant? Taxability of procurement of goods, taxability of outward supply of goods, and final ruling of the AAR and what it, this decision is likely to leave behind. So Sterlite deals with what we call as MTT, merchant trade transactions. So meaning, let's say you are an Indian company, you buy products from China and you sell it to US. You don't bring these products to India, so you just do invoicing. This is what we call as MTT transaction, merchant trade transactions. Now, MTT transactions, the goods don't come here. So you buy it in China and you sell it to US. You book the profits in India. So the question is, should GST fall within those transactions? So this is where we have to get into the uh, question for definition of the term export and how far practical it is. So coming back, if you look at the provisions of GST law, taxability of import. Import means bringing goods into India from a place outside India. And the supply of goods imported into the territory of India till they cross the customs from frontiers. Okay, the moment they cross, it becomes shall be treated as supply of goods. And IGST shall be levied and collected on goods imported into India in accordance with the provisions of customs law. So the goods do not come into India in the circumstance of what we are saying. So if we look at it, IGST on goods imported in India shall be levied and collected at the point when duties of customs are levied on the said goods under customs law. And Section 7.5 of the IGST states that when the supplier is located in India and the place of supply is outside, it shall be treated to be an interstate trade or commerce. Now, GST on outward supply from place of vendor to customer. Again, Section 7 of CGST states that the expression supply includes all forms of supply of goods or services, such as sale, transfer, barter, exchange, etc., in the course of furtherance of business. And Section 10 of IGST Act provides that the place of supply of goods, other than supply of goods imported into or exported from India, where the supply involves movement of goods, whether by the supplier or the recipient, shall be at the location of the goods at the time at which the movement of goods terminates. Also, very important for us. And definition of the term export, this is where the problem comes. Taking goods out of India to a place outside India. So, in a normal export, you export from India, but when I buy from China and send it to US, I don't take it out of India. I take it from out of China and send it into US. But why should I pay tax in India for that? Especially GST. You can pay income tax. Why should I pay GST? So what are the interesting aspects which AAR had to deal with in this case? If we get to the facts, Sterlite was engaged in development and supply of software with respect to telecom, uh, basically the Wi-Fi service management platform, and it was also in the business of trading in hardware. And they procured the hardware from a vendor located in India as well as outside India. And such hardware is sold as per the requirement of the customer on payment of GST. And this is what we call as MTT, merchant trade transaction, which, as I mentioned earlier. The applicant will receive an order from the customer located outside India, and back to back orders will be placed to a vendor located outside India. Again, as per the applicant's instruction, vendor would directly ship goods to customer located outside India, and vendor would issue invoice on applicant against which payment would be made in forex, and the applicant would raise invoice on customers and would receive consideration in foreign currency. So here the goods physically would not move out of India, but it is effectively a foreign trade which happens. What are the issues raised? The applicant raised the following issues for determination before the AAR. Whether GST is payable on goods procured from the vendor located outside India, in the context where the goods so purchased are not brought into India, and whether GST is payable on goods sold to customers outside India, where goods are shipped directly from the vendor's premises to the customer's premises outside India. So these were the two main questions. And if you were to look at the verdict of AAR, the arguments which the AAR raised here, on procurement of goods, as we saw earlier, import goods are subject to GST only when they cross the customs frontier. So in this case, the goods are not crossing the customs frontier of India, so there is no requirement of GST on import of transactions. Now, when you look at the case for, and they also held that in the case of Synthet Industries, Kerala, the goods are liable to IGST when they are imported into India and is payable at the time of importation. And the applicant is neither liable to GST on sale procured of goods procured from China and directly supplied to US, nor on the sale of goods stored in the warehouse in Netherlands after being procured from China to customers in and around Netherlands, as they are not imported into India at any point. So it's a fairly straightforward decision. Now the real concern comes in the taxability on outward supply of goods. So the thumb rule for determining the taxability of any transaction is to ascertain whether the transaction tantamounts to supply. So what is a supply of goods from India? Is it a supply of goods from India? Now, here is where the definition of the term export is one thing which we saw earlier. Here, the applicant is selling goods for a consideration, and in the event where the goods are supplied by a person located in India and the place of supply is outside, such supply shall be treated as interstate supply. But interstate supply only in the case of exports are not subject to tax. So the place of supply in this case would be the location where the movement of goods terminates to the recipient. The goods under consideration are supplied to overseas buyers as declared by the applicant, and the supply will be a place outside India. So we understand that it will be an interstate supply, but will it tantamount to export is where the concern comes. So once the levy of IGST is confirmed, the only resort to for no GST is it should not be falling within the ambit of export. But if you look at a case definition of the term export, it means taking goods out of India to a place outside. So, and in this case, the goods have not crossed the customs frontier, and therefore it is clear that the goods are not physically available within the country, and hence the transaction does not qualify as export. I mean, as much as you might say the letter of law is complied with, uh, the spirit of law seems to be completely violated. In view of the above, it appears that the transaction is covered within the ambit of interstate supply and is not exempted by virtue of the term export of goods. So, thus, the theory of elimination concludes that such supplies will be subject to the levy of IGST. It was not far ago, friends. We had the same AAR ruling in an income tax decision on Tiger Global case, where they looked at substance over form. When the case for substance over form can be viewed to bring about a transaction which on paper or on structure looks exempt, but on in specie looks taxable. Why not take a stand which is contrary to what the same AR has taken just weeks ago for the purpose of GST? Now, here in substance, it's an export transaction. In form, it does not fall within the definition of the term export under the law. But the definition is not all encompassing. There is a lacuna in the definition. And by making MTD transactions taxable, or an Indian consumer, I mean businessman buys from China and sells it in US, and you're going to make it subject to GST in India, even though he earns foreign currency, what are you going to do? If he brings the goods from China to India and India to US, it's allowed. Okay, basically, primarily because you would end up saying that this transaction has been imported and then you have exported. But look at the wastage of time, cost, all for the lacuna in the Indian regulation. I think the judiciary should definitely look well within their own decisions and focus more on substance over form while making such orders, because this has really tarnished the image of India. The last three decisions of AAR, beginning with, of course, Tiger Global, at least you can still say there is some merit in what they have done. But what has happened with both these two GST decisions, as paratas, roti or otherwise, or MTD transaction, just because you will bring the goods through the Indian waters, you will levy GST, looks absolutely ridiculous. We hope both these are overturned at the High Court level. And so AAR came back and said GST is not payable on import because the goods don't cross border, the customs frontier, and GST is also not payable on export because the goods have not been taken out of India to a place outside India. So definitely, we would really expect the government to step in to set the interpretations straight, because otherwise, again, doing business in India is going to be a nightmare, or will continue to be a nightmare. So thank you. These were some of our thoughts on these recent and controversial decisions. Thank you.